Good afternoon, everyone, and have a fantastic Sunday. I hope you're all having a great day and enjoying your weekend with good health, peace, and plenty of positive moments. It's another important day for Detroit Lions fans, with new developments and storylines surrounding the team that deserve our attention. So without wasting any time, let's get straight into today's news and take a closer look at what is happening around the Lions, what it could mean for the team, and why this situation is something every fan should be paying attention to. The Detroit Lions just made a move that could end up being much more important than it looks at first, and at the same time, the details of Jahmyr Gibbs' new contract give us a much clearer picture of how this team is trying to manage its future. On the surface, seeing a contract worth around $80 million immediately makes you wonder how Detroit is going to keep paying all of its important players. But when you actually look at how the deal is structured, the situation becomes much more interesting and honestly, much less concerning for Lions fans. The Lions also brought in 3 defensive players, and while these additions can be viewed as camp bodies, there is one name that stands out from the group: Anthony Kendall. Kendall went undrafted in 2023 and spent his first 2 seasons with the Tennessee Titans. During his rookie season, he appeared in 16 games and became a core special teams player, playing roughly 300 snaps. Things did not develop the same way during his second season, and he eventually spent time with the Ravens and Browns as well. He is a small school prospect with a good RAS score, and although there is no guarantee that he makes the roster, there is enough in his background to make him someone worth watching during camp. That is the kind of move Detroit can afford to make right now. The Lions are adding competition, creating more opportunities, and giving players a chance to prove that they belong. Kendall may have been an undrafted player who fell out of the spotlight, but he has already shown that he can contribute at the NFL level. Now he has another opportunity in Detroit, and that makes this a move worth monitoring as camp continues. But the biggest story here is Jahmyr Gibbs and the structure of his new contract. When the headline says that Gibbs signed a 3-year deal worth around $80 million, the immediate reaction is obvious. That sounds like an enormous number. It works out to roughly $25 million per year, and if you only look at the average annual value, it can feel like Detroit just created another massive financial problem for itself. But that is not the way the Lions are looking at this. The important numbers are the actual cap hits. According to the information we're looking at, the next few seasons are much more manageable than the headline number suggests. Gibbs has a base salary and signing bonus structure that keeps the early cap hits relatively low, with numbers around $8 million and $6 million before reaching a cap hit of roughly $15 million in the later portion of this initial stretch. And this is exactly where the Lions' strategy becomes clear. Detroit is essentially backloading the contract. The financial commitment eventually jumps significantly, reaching around $27 million, but there is a reason for that. The salary cap is expected to continue increasing, and the expectation is that the cap will be significantly higher several years from now than it is today. So instead of forcing the Lions to absorb the largest financial impact immediately, the structure allows the team to take advantage of future cap growth. That gives Detroit something extremely valuable: flexibility. The NFL changes constantly. Players develop, players decline, new contracts appear, rookies arrive, unexpected needs emerge. A team that looks completely different today can have completely different priorities 3 or 4 years from now. By pushing more of the financial burden into the future, the Lions are buying themselves time and information, and that could become especially important if Gibbs continues developing into the kind of player many people inside and around the team believe he can become. If Jahmyr Gibbs becomes an all-time great player for the Lions and continues getting stronger, Detroit can revisit the situation later. The structure gives the organization the ability to adjust the contract, potentially add another extension, and restructure the financial picture when there is more information available. That is also why the contract cannot be viewed in isolation. Detroit has other young players who could eventually require major investments. The team has to think about Isaac Tesla and what he could become. There will be other players reaching important points in their careers. There will be decisions about who deserves another contract, who needs to be extended, and where the money should go. That is what makes the Gibbs situation so fascinating. As fans, we naturally want our favorite players to get paid. If Gibbs is one of the most exciting players on the team, nobody wants to see him leave because the Lions could not reach an agreement. But at the same time, we are not just rooting for one individual player. We are rooting for the Detroit Lions as a team. The goal is not simply to give every player the biggest possible contract. The goal goal is to build a team that can continue winning. And from the structure described here, Detroit appears to have created a deal that gives Gibbs a major commitment while still keeping the early cap impact manageable. That is a very important distinction, especially for a team that wants to remain competitive and continue building around its young core. Now, when we step back from the contract and look at the entire roster, there are some very interesting developments coming out of training camp. At quarterback, Jared Goff continues to receive extremely strong marks. The assessment is essentially that there is very little to worry about with Goff right now. He is viewed as being in his prime and playing at a top level. Teddy Bridgewater remains part of the picture, while Luke Altmyer is someone the team would like to see more from during the preseason. The preseason will be particularly important for that backup quarterback competition because it gives Detroit another opportunity to evaluate what it has behind Goff. At running back, the situation is a little more complicated. Gibbs is only getting back into the flow of things, and the group has been affected by injuries and absences. The assessment places the running back room around a B, with the potential to improve as the situation becomes clearer. Isaiah Pacheco is also part of the equation, and the team will need to see more from him before making a final judgment on how strong this group can be. At wide receiver, there is much more optimism. Jameson Williams is being described as a star, and that is a major positive for Detroit. Isaac Taslea has received mixed reviews so far, but Williams is standing out and giving the Lions another reason to be excited about the passing game. The tight end group is around a B, with Jackson Meeks emerging as someone who is starting to attract attention. That is exactly the kind of development a team wants to see during training camp, a player stepping forward and creating more competition within the position group. The offensive line is also around a B, but there is still an important question surrounding the left guard position. Penei Sewell is transitioning into a different role, and even though there is no question about his ability, changing positions naturally requires an adjustment period. Cade Mays is doing his part, while Blake Miller is beginning his development as a rookie, so there are reasons for optimism, but also legitimate questions that still need to be answered. The defensive line is another group sitting around a B, with positive reports surrounding the players being discussed there. The edge group, however, is receiving one of the strongest evaluations so far. The players in that group are getting rave reviews, and that is exactly what Lions fans want to hear, because the ability to create pressure consistently can change the entire personality of a defense. The linebacker group is also where Detroit wants it to be, with Jack Campbell standing out as a major positive. The biggest concern may be at cornerback. That group is being evaluated closer to a C, largely because Detroit lost someone it had been hoping to rely on, and the team has not yet seen enough consistency to completely eliminate the concern. One of the positive developments has been White, but the receivers have also been making plays in the clips and reports that have emerged from camp. And then there is safety, where the situation has been described as frustrating. Detroit has some uncertainty there, but Chuck Clark and Isaiah are players the team can feel reasonably comfortable with, while Avonte Maddox also provides another piece to evaluate. The specialists are still difficult to judge at this stage because there simply has not been enough information to make a strong assessment. So when you put all of this together, the picture coming out of camp is actually pretty interesting. Detroit has several groups performing around expectations, some groups that appear to be exceeding expectations, and a few areas that still need to prove themselves. The Gibbs contract is another major piece of that puzzle because it shows that the Lions are not simply thinking about today. They are thinking about how this roster can remain competitive years from now while continuing to pay the players who earn those investments. And that brings us to the question I want to leave with you. After seeing the way Jahmyr Gibbs' contract is structured and looking at how the different position groups are performing so far, do you believe the Lions have made the right moves to keep this team competitive for the long term? And which position group concerns you the most right now? And that question becomes even more important when you look at the overall strategy behind these decisions. The Lions are not simply trying to build a roster that looks good on paper right now. The way this roster is being evaluated shows a team trying to understand where it is strong, where it needs more competition, and where it still needs improvement before the season arrives. Starting with the quarterback room, there is very little reason for concern at the top. Jared Goff is entering his prime, and the evaluation coming out of camp is extremely positive. The expectation is that he remains one of the top quarterbacks in the league, which gives Detroit something every team wants: stability at the most important position on the field. Behind him, Teddy Bridgewater and Luke Altmyer have a different job. They have to prove that the Lions have enough depth if they ever need to turn to someone other than Goff. The preseason will be an important opportunity, especially for Altmaier, because more game action should give the coaching staff additional information about what he can bring. Then you get to the running back position, and this is where the situation is more complicated than simply looking at the talent available. Jahmyr Gibbs is obviously the centerpiece, but he is only getting back into the flow of things. That means the team needs to see how quickly he gets back to his normal level. The evaluation of the room is around a B, but there are reasons why it could move in either direction. Isaiah Pacheco is another important part of that equation. The information coming out of camp suggests that he is doing okay, but there is still more to evaluate. Detroit needs to see how all of these pieces fit together, especially with Gibbs returning and the rest of the room competing for opportunities. At wide receiver, the feeling is much more encouraging. Jameson Williams is being described as a star, and that is a major development for this offense. When you have a player capable of creating explosive plays and continuing to establish himself, it changes what defenses have to prepare for. Isaac Tesleya is a different